So back in our web page, I have my document ready, and down at the bottom I have a form. You'll see that right here. And in that form I have an input type equals text for a text box. You'll notice the value is hard-coded to John. We're going to access that value in just a moment. We have an input, which is type text for last name, and we have a text area. Now we could add a select to really kind of fill in the whole gamut of input controls, but text area is definitely different than a standard input. Now if we came in, and let's say we came in, and I'll tell you what, let's do this first. In the area of the text box, let's just say, or the text area, let's go ahead and say text area right there. And so you'll notice when we go to design view, we see text area and we see John, and then this one's empty. Well, what we can do to get to the values is, first off, we can use the colon input selector. So let's go ahead and we'll do that. We'll do our jQuery selector syntax. We'll say input, and then that'll give us back a collection. But I want to show something to be aware of when you work with collections that we haven't seen up to this point, and a very useful thing to know about. So we'll say inputs equals that. We've seen that a couple times. So that'll grab all the text areas, all the buttons, all the image buttons, everything that is associated with basically a form. Well, let's go ahead and say we want to write out the value of, this one will be the second input. There's another one that'll be generated that's hidden by the page, but we'll ignore that one. So you would think I could probably say inputs 1, which would be get to the first child, and then just go directly in and get to maybe the value of that. And the way you do that in jQuery is you say val. Okay, that literally ties us into, in the case of something like an input, it ties us into the value. Or in the case of a text area, it'll still allow you to get the text of that particular text area. Very simple to use and something that takes a little getting used to, but works great because there's only one method you have to go through, one function, to be able to get to your values of your input controls. But there's a little bit of a problem with this that I want to illustrate. So let's go ahead and fire this up in Chrome. And you'll notice you don't really see anything here, but I'm going to run off to the Chrome Developer Tools. So we'll come down into our Developer Tools here. And you'll notice on the Console tab of the Developer Tools, there's uncaught type error, object, HTML input element has no method val. Well, you might, first time you see that, might wonder, what's going on here with our particular input and getting the value. Well, the answer is right now, input is a little bit different than you might think. In fact, we could come in and we could say alert, and we could do type of inputs 1. And let's go ahead and try to run that guy. And you'll see it's just an object at this point, so that doesn't really help a lot. So what's happening is if you want to get to val, that's a jQuery function. In order to get to jQuery functions, you have to have a jQuery wrapper around your object in order for that to work properly. So what we're going to do here is we're going to wrap the $selector type syntax around the object. In fact, you'll see you get IntelliSense for this. Notice here the IntelliSense says you can give it an element array, a jQuery object even. Well, at this point, we actually have an element. So we have an HTML object, if you will, an HTML element up in memory, which represents our inputs 1. We're going to wrap that with the jQuery object, and that allows us to get to the jQuery functionality and to work with this as we'd expect. Now, inputs 1 just so happens to be this input right here, this text box, which has a value of John. So let's go ahead and go back up and run this now. And you'll notice we're able to get to John. So what we could also do then to get to all the values of our form inputs is we could iterate through those. Now I could do a for loop through this and then put a jQuery wrapper around each one to easily get to the value. But we're going to do the each that I showed a little bit earlier. So we're going to come in and say get me all the inputs. And once we get the input, we want to say each of those. So we want to instantly loop through each of those, and that's going to call an anonymous function. And then in here, we can kind of break this out into steps, and we can say element equals this. Now you'll notice that this is a jQuery wrapper around an object called this. Well, what is this at this point? Well, as we loop through each input item, it's going to pass it into this each function, and that will represent, in this case, the text box as an example. We're going to wrap that though, and now we have a jQuery wrapper. So I'm just going to put a comment. This is wrapped in a jQuery wrapper at this point. Now we can come in and say alert elem dot, and notice we're able to get to the full set of IntelliSense for jQuery now because it knows there was a jQuery wrapper. Well, we can get the val because that allows us to get to the value of our particular item, and then we'll just again show that in an alert. So let's go ahead and fill out the form here, and well, I run it actually because it's running in document ready. Okay, that's a hidden. There's John. Okay, there's an empty one. There's our text area, and there's our submit button. So you can see those are the different inputs it looped through. Now, likewise, let's come down really quickly, and let's put in a select inside of this. So we'll change this to a select. Add some options to it. We'll just call it that. And inside of our select, let's just say we want to add, maybe, I don't know, a couple states or something. So we'll say option, and then we can come in and add the standard values. And so we can come in and say value equals AZ, and we'll do one for California. So let me just copy that. Okay, now if you've done this before with standard JavaScript, you'll know that with selects, you usually have to check the selected item that they're on to get to the value. Well, with jQuery, it's very consistent based upon what is selected. So let me go ahead and select the second one. So we'll say selected, and I'm going to add an official true, or you could do selected equals selected if you wanted, but I like to finish mine, although we could just put selected. And now let's see what happens as we loop through the different items. I just want to point out how nice this val function is when you're working with input controls. So let's go ahead and do that. And there's our hidden. There's our John from our text box. Okay, there's some emptiness there. Text area, California. You'll see that it did pick it up directly. And then we have our submit value for our button. You see California is selected, of course, down here. Now, that's really nice because you don't have to now check, are we on a text area? Are we on a text box? Are we on a button? Are we on a select? It just automatically allows you to get to an input control and return the value of it just by calling that. Now, we could also set the value as well. So we could go through and, say val equals foo. And what this will do is actually loop through each item and try to set that value. Now with a select, it's not going to be as useful, but now it's going to loop through it. And you'll notice that first off, everything was set to foo. Now, like I said, with the select, we didn't have that option, so we'd actually have to add that option in. But you can see also how easy it is to assign a value to any type of input control. So to kind of back up and rehash what we talked about. The colon input selects all input controls. So again, that includes text area, select, and all the inputs, button, image button, all those things. We can then use the each function in jQuery to loop through each item, and then that'll pass each item into this anonymous function, and then we can grab it by putting a jQuery wrapper around this, around the object that was passed in. From there, we can either get the value of an input or set the value of an input by calling the val function. Very, very easy, and once you get the hang of it, especially if you're used to doing it the old way, which is, you write the custom JavaScript and you check the control you're on and all that fun stuff. With jQuery, they really simplify that and make it super easy to work with input controls. All right, so that's an example of working with those. Now, if we wanted to go in on the input control and do other things like select other types of input controls, You could use input, and as I mentioned earlier, you could come in and say type equals radio as an example, but that wouldn't be that efficient. It'd be more efficient if we had a radio to do that. Then we're locking it down to just the input tags. Well, there's some other stuff that's available. So what I'm going to do to wrap up this part of it is let's run off to the jQuery.com documentation. And on the left, I'm going to run over to selectors. And all the stuff we've been talking about is available in the selectors area. But I want to point out a couple things. Okay, if you want to find all checkboxes, all buttons, you can do colon checkbox, colon button. You want to find all the stuff that's checked, you could just do that. Moving on down, you'll see you can find images this way, hidden elements. And then of course, we have the input as well that we just looked at. And as you click on these different items that go in, they'll have a nice example for you. Shows you all the stuff you can find, text areas, buttons, selects, inputs, all that stuff with a code sample of, kind of how to work with that type of stuff. So this is a really nice, I don't know if it's a trick, but it's a really nice technique to know about if you want to iterate through all the inputs in a given form. Because keep in mind, in a form, especially my form here, it's not just as simple as say go find the form and then go find all the inputs as children. So we could do this. We could say go find the form and then go find all the inputs. Well, again, that's only going to find the inputs of that form. That won't find the text areas, the selects, and stuff like that. So what's nice about the colon input, it'll find everything you need within this particular screen. And we could even do this. If you want to lock it down, if you only had one form, then we could say, hey, go find that form, and then go ahead and find all the inputs within that form. So if we run it, you'll see we get the same exact thing. And then thinking through this, taking it a step further, how can we make it even more efficient to find all the inputs? Well, let's go down to our form. Notice this form has an ID. Not a very good one, but it does have an ID, form 1. So to make this even more efficient, we could do that. We could say go find form 1 and then go find all the inputs on that particular form, and you'll see that again we get the same exact results. So it makes it really nice to work with this in a very, very simple way. So that's an example of using the colon input selector with jQuery.